Welcome to the Times of Israel's daily briefing. Today is Wednesday, May 21st, day 593 of the war. I'm Amanda Borschel-Dan here with our military correspondent, Emanuel Fabian. Hi, Manny. Thanks for joining me today.
Hi, Amanda.
Even as Israel has begun to allow humanitarian aid into the Gaza Strip, the United Nations Humanitarian Aid Chief Tom Fletcher claims that some 14,000 babies could die in the Strip in the next 48 hours. We'll hear what aid is now being let in. We'll also hear warnings coming from IDF Chief of Staff Eyal Zamir to Hamas, saying if you do not release the hostages, the army is poised to take control of swaths of territory. And we'll learn about the fighting on the ground and where it may go from here. All this and more when we're back.
Jews have to learn to walk and chew gum at the same time. Thank you, Mr. President, for Jerusalem. No thank you for banning Arabs. His message on anti-Semitism is a good message. Trump is saying all the right things, and he may even be doing the right things, but for the wrong reasons. It's a dilemma for us, but I think we still have to stand up for the institutions, for due process, even if the wrong things that he's doing help us in the long term.
I just don't see how they help us at all, because I think in the long
Yehuda,
run...
there needs to be consequences. You can go out, you can march with a Palestinian flag, God bless you. That's fine. But if you use that flag to stop a Jewish students to go to class or beat them up, that's not freedom of speech. There needs to be consequences.
I'm Amanda Borschel-Dan here with our military reporter, Emanuel Fabian. Manny, with the renewed ramped up fighting, of course, there have also been casualties among the soldiers from the IDF, and we heard about two in the past 2 days. One soldier was named this morning, Staff Sgt. Danilo Mocanu, and the second was named a day prior, and that was Sergeant Yosef Yehuda Chirak. So, Manny, tell us about these two incidents, these two separate incidents.
Right, so one was in the north of the Strip, one was in the south, actually. So I'll start with the incident on Monday with Sergeant Yosef Chirak. Unfortunately, in the incident of this soldier, he was killed by friendly fire. He was in the Combat Engineering Corps' 601st Battalion, so his troops, him and other comrades, were investigating a tunnel in northern Gaza. And while they were carrying out this investigation, mapping out the tunnel, preparing it for demolition, another force was operating in the area. They were supposed to be securing that force. For some reason, they were hit by gunfire from that other company, and that one of the shots hit and killed Chirak. The army's still investigating as to what led the other force to open fire on the other soldiers. Maybe they misidentified, maybe they were trying to shoot at something else. It's not quite clear as to what happened. But this, of course, is not the first time that we've seen such cases of friendly fire during the war. Even since the beginning of the war, I don't remember the exact number, but I think it was at some point it was like 80 soldiers were killed in accidents and friendly fire cases throughout the war. Accidents, of course, is not just friendly fire, all sorts of other accidents, but quite a significant number of troops during the fighting have been killed in I would say avoidable circumstances. The other soldier who was killed yesterday, like you mentioned, Staff Sergeant Danilo Mocanu, he was operating in the Khan Yunis area in the southern Gaza Strip. He and another soldier went into a building, and in the building there was an explosive device that apparently Hamas had planted there beforehand, and it exploded, and it was on the sort of the top floor, the fourth floor of the building, and it brought down that floor onto them. The other soldier, the second soldier who was with him, was lightly wounded, but Mocanu was sort of trapped under the rubble for many hours, and it took a long time to extract him from it. And of course, he was killed by the explosion and the collapse of the building. Still, both incidents aren't sort of. It's not this face-to-face fighting yet we're seeing with Hamas. It's still I mean, even until now, many of the soldiers killed in Gaza have been killed by explosives planted by Hamas, left behind. There isn't that much direct fighting between IDF soldiers and Hamas operatives in general during the war, and especially not yet, even though the army has ramped up its operations in Gaza.
Okay, we will talk about the operations in a minute, but first let's discuss the humanitarian aid efforts. And from Sunday night, Israel ordered the resumption of allowing aid into Gaza. And on the first day, I believe only 5 trucks were let in. And yesterday, I believe it was 93. So this is really a drop in the bucket when you're talking about the need that we're clearly seeing is evident in the Gaza Strip.
So Israel really wants to begin the new sort of aid distribution mechanism that it's been talking about for a while, where it has this sort of distribution locations in the Rafah area, where the army secures the perimeter and then an American company does the actual distribution. Israel wants to do that because it's a much more effective way of preventing such aid from reaching Hamas. Because individually, each family would have to come and pick up aid, and Israel would screen each person and make sure that Hamas isn't coming to collect it. And if you do, the deliveries to an individual person, it's not Hamas taking the entire truck. And that's what Hamas would do, is they would take an entire truck, and then they would sell it back to the market to get money and then pay their operatives. That system, that mechanism is not set up yet. It's not ready. We don't know how long more it will take for it to be ready. But until then, Israel reached this point where it's sort of a red line where if Israel was to not allow any more aid in, and it stopped aid on March 2, then starvation would begin in Gaza. Israel does monitor the level of food in Gaza, and basically Israel has this line where it says, if we cross this, then there's going to be a humanitarian crisis in Gaza, and that's bad. Of course, we've heard to be fair, since the beginning of the war, probably since day 2 of the war, we've heard that famine and is imminent in Gaza, and these assessments by all these various organizations, by the UN and others, clearly not all of them have been very accurate. So Israel does do its own estimations there, and it figured that this is the moment where if we don't allow any more aid in, then it will lead to famine or starvation or a major humanitarian crisis. So that's why Israel was sort of forced to resume the aid. So 5 trucks on the first day, of course, it's not very much. 93 trucks now on the second day. Again, it's not a huge amount, and I don't think Israel wants to allow a huge amount in. During the ceasefire, it was allowing in 650 trucks per day, which is a lot of aid. And I don't think Israel wants to do that again. It doesn't even need to, because it just wants to keep it sort of the level in Gaza just below the level of a major crisis. So allow just enough aid in to make sure the population isn't starving. At least that's what Israel is saying. So we may see again today more trucks, maybe another 100 trucks go in. Definitely not 650 until the new mechanism can start, and then Israel will stop the trucks going in just randomly into Gaza to reach. Potentially some of it will reach Hamas, but instead do the distribution system where each individual person comes to pick up aid.
The allegations right now from the United Nations humanitarian aid head is among them. Of course, I noted that 14,000 babies, he said, are on the brink of death right now within the next 48 hours. But among the things that he is claiming is that nobody can actually receive this aid, meaning it may even be coming in, but there's absolutely no distribution. And does the army feel at this point, before this new mechanism is set up, that the army is responsible also for the distribution, or is it just basically throwing this aid into a black hole and whatever will be will be?
It essentially is throwing into a black hole. That's what happened up until now during the war. It gets sent into Gaza, and Israel hopes for the best that it gets to the right people, and it doesn't get to the right people, let's be honest. Hamas has been hijacking the aid since the beginning of the war, since Israel allowed an aid into Gaza. That's how it's been paying its operative. That's how it's been feeding itself. It's no secret. There are aid distribution sites. There's the UN and other organizations that have been doing, but it's not in all areas, and of course not all the aid is going through those channels. So these 93 trucks, I mean, who knows who it will reach, and hopefully it reaches the right people, of course. The aid that's going in now, I mean, the first 5 trucks, according to the Kogat, the Defense Ministry authority, that's responsible for allowing the aid, and they said it was all baby food in those 5 trucks, mostly baby food. And the 93 trucks the other day was flour, more baby food, medical equipment, and pharmaceuticals. So it's possible Hamas will try to hijack this and resell it, but it's sort of the kind of thing that Israel expects them to not be stealing, right? They're not going to be stealing baby food unless they want to resell it, of course. But that's basically the idea now.
Okay, alongside the aid, of course, the operations have been ramping up, and there are claims of dozens of Gazans who have been killed in the past several days since about Saturday. These are according to Hamas-run health ministries or other Hamas-run ministries. They cannot be verified, but it is clear that the airstrikes alone are causing mass swaths of destruction. So, Manny, what can you tell us about the strategy or what is operationally happening in the Gaza Strip right now?
So right now there are 5 IDF divisions in Gaza. If you want to try and calculate that, it's kind of hard to say, but probably tens of thousands of troops are currently in Gaza. If you wanted to try and figure out, because we don't exactly know the exact numbers, but and of course there are lots of airstrikes being carried out. The army reported that I think it's during the opening 2 or 3 days of its sort of new offensive in Gaza, it carried out nearly 700 airstrikes in Gaza, which is quite significant compared to other sort of periods in the war.
Let's actually compare it to the beginning of the war. It sounds to me a similar kind of number. Is that accurate?
Yeah, in the beginning of the war, it was maybe not the first month of the war, but in the height of the ground offensive, it was around 300 strikes per day. We were seeing, so now 700 in 3 or 4 days. It's close. It's close to that. It's quite a significant amount of strikes, and of course, a lot of destruction and a lot of reported casualties.
What are the targets of these airstrikes? I mean, Gaza has already been struck so many times. So what other targets are there at this point?
So the army is saying it's targeting. I mean, it sounds very familiar, but buildings used by terror groups, booby-trapped structures where Hamas has planted explosives, command centers, weapon depots, those that remain, tunnels as well. There were several strikes on tunnels, even though it's proven at least to be not so effective to try and target tunnels from the air, because you don't know exactly where the route runs, and it's quite difficult usually to target them. Also, the army says it targets anti-tank missile launch sites, which essentially means any elevated position that Hamas could use to target troops with. So as troops move into a new area, if there's a building that's a tall building that's looking over the forces, then the army targets that, because that could be used by Hamas to attack forces from. And also cells of operatives, when the army identifies Hamas operatives moving around from area to area or setting up some sort of ambush, then they target them as well. So strikes are reported across the entire Gaza Strip, mainly in areas where troops are advancing into, because the army is trying to essentially provide them with a sort of a security to ensure that the troops aren't harmed as they push into new areas. And at the same time, the army has also called for evacuation orders. So there was the sort of the first main evacuation order was ordered for Khan Yunis. So the entire Khan Yunis area, the army instructed Palestinians to leave. Of course, not all of them have left. And that essentially means that the army is going to be pushing into the Khan Yunis area following major airstrikes. And it expects the Palestinian civilian population to leave the area sort of immediately. And we saw reports that thousands of people were fleeing that area, and the army told them to head to the Mawasi area on the coast. There's now very few areas where Palestinian civilians are actually in Gaza. Most of the north is cleared of civilians. There are, of course, small pockets here and there in Gaza City. There's a few pockets. And then in the center, it's mainly focused in the Deir Balach and the Nuseirat area. And in the south, mainly in Mawasi and Rafah, there's basically no civilians. Or there are no civilians in Rafah right now, according to the army. In Khan Yunis, the army ordered to evacuate, and probably over the next few days, there won't be anybody left in that area either.
Okay, let's go to a short break and continue discussing these operations.
What surprised you the most discovering about Jewish life in the United States?
I think it's the pride. I think I was envy of that pride. Just being proud, being a proud Jew. It's something that I never even contemplated. I was just an Israeli. I think the fact that, in Israel, we have all sort of sectors in society. You kind of grow up with your kind. I hate that. The fact that I don't know a lot about my Jewish life and I need to go abroad just to understand that. It's something so messed up and how we grew up here. It's just, I think, once it got political to be Jewish in Israel, it made me kind of push away from that. Once I got to LA, once I got just being with my daughters abroad, just understanding what we are, my heritage, where we come from, our story, our values. It took me a long time. It took me a long time to get there.
And we're back. I'm Amanda Borschel-Dan here with our military reporter, Emanuel Fabian. So this Gideon's Chariot operation appears to me to be focusing on the places that the IDF has not operated in, and also to clear a lot of the population centers of the population and to focus them into more controlled zones. As you mentioned, Rafah is basically cleared of civilians right now. The idea with this new humanitarian aid mechanism is to have the people go to Rafah, which has been checked out and considered cleared of Hamas as well, and then to basically move on to other parts of the Gaza Strip. So it's very complicated. It's multi-layered. You have just described how when a new unit goes into a certain area, the air cover will take down tall buildings so that the soldiers will have less, so that Hamas will have less ability to target the soldiers from above. It appears to me, however, that there are still 2.2 million people in the Gaza Strip. So if all of these places are basically being turned into rubble, where are they meant to be going? You have mentioned in the past that there is no real humanitarian safe zone. And so what is the expectation right now from the population as the army moves into Deir al-Balak, where it hasn't really operated as much in the past?
So the idea is, as far as I understand, is to have them move to Rafah and for them to be in tent camps there. I mean, they were, of course, the massive parts of the population in Gaza were living in tent camps anyway, in Rafah, in Khan Yunis, and in central Gaza during the war. And the idea for the new humanitarian zone is basically, they call it the Rafah model, which is you've operated in Rafah, you've cleared it of Hamas infrastructure, you've cleared it of basically all infrastructure. Actually, the city has essentially been flattened at this point. And then you build humanitarian infrastructure there, tent camps, aid distribution sites, and then move the Palestinian population back to that area. And then you repeat that in other areas of Gaza, where you clear the area, remove all the infrastructure, basically flatten it, if you're going to be using that word, and then allow people to move back in. But you do a security screening on them, you check that they're not Hamas, and then you build up infrastructure for them to live in, humanitarian infrastructure, tents and everything. And that's sort of the idea here. Is this really feasible? I don't know. It sounds very difficult to carry out. If they manage to do it in Rafah, maybe they'll be able to repeat it elsewhere, but even doing it in Rafah sounds very difficult because Rafah's not a huge part of Gaza. It's like 10, 15% maybe of the entire Strip's territory, and to try and squeeze 2 million people into there sounds like a huge challenge and maybe something that's even impossible. But what is being said as well is that Israel wants to enable Palestinians to leave Gaza as well, the whole voluntary emigration plan. And the defense minister said that part of this operation is also allowing Palestinians to leave out of the Gaza Strip via the Rafah area, either through Egypt or through the Ramon airport that Israel has. That's mainly the route that's been used, is the Ramon airport for Palestinians to go abroad to other countries. And then depends how many would leave, then maybe it would make it more, make it maybe a little bit more sensible to have 2 million or less people in the Rafah area. But I don't know how many people are actually going to leave, or if they want to leave, or how many people even end up in this humanitarian zone. Some people might refuse to leave their areas in the other parts of Gaza. So it's really quite complicated, and even I don't really know how it's going to work, but at least that's the plan, is to flatten, establish aid centers, and allow the population to move back in while screening out Hamas.
Right. And of course, IDF Chief of Staff Eyal Zamir announced very threateningly that he is poised to do this. He, meaning the army, is poised to carry this out. And we're seeing really no movement in the hostage release ceasefire negotiations in Doha. I'm not even sure if they're taking place at all at this point. So let's hit pause on this discussion, and we'll leave our program there. And Manny, thank you as usual for all of your insights and updates.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Times of Israel's Daily Briefing. Please check out another installment tomorrow. This episode was produced by the Podwaves and video edited by Thomas Gersh. If you have any comments or questions about this or any other episode, please drop us an email to podcast@timesofisrael.com. Until tomorrow, shalom.